Port Charles did not simply live through the night, it held its breath. The moonlight stretched thin across the river as if the town's very pulse had been pinched between two fingers. In the hush before dawn, Jason stood on the shoreline where the water kept its own counsel, a dark ribbon of secrets braided beneath the surface. The familiar calculus returned, risk measured against duty, love weighed against consequence. He had known this arithmetic all his life, but the variables had changed. Somewhere inside the web of decisions lay Britt, a storm he could read by instinct, and Carly, a compass that had long pointed him home even when home was a moving target. The choice was not between people so much as between promises, and Port Charles has always demanded that its guardians choose which promises to keep and which ones to bury. When the town finally exhaled, it did so in the antiseptic glow of hospital corridors and the low hum of hotel ice machines. Rumors moved faster than elevators. People said Jason had crossed paths with Britt again, and those whispers drifted through the nurses' station like contraband. Their reunion, however inevitable, did not arrive with a flourish but with the efficient gravity of two planets resuming an orbit. Behind the brittle professionalism in Britt's posture, a truth worked its way toward the light. Somewhere beyond state lines and press releases, the Five Poppies Resort was not merely a destination for luxury, it was a pivot. It was a place where medicine met ambition at an uncomfortable angle, where talent, connections, and quiet coercion were mixed in equal parts and poured back into Port Charles like a tonic with an aftertaste. Britt had carried this knowledge by herself too long, and the weight of it had begun to kink the line between her conscience and her career. Meeting Jason again did not absolve her of that burden, it recalibrated it. Jason understood that recalibration without asking for a confession. He could feel it in the way Britt's hands moved, deliberate, careful, practiced at hiding tremors. He could feel it in the way her gaze slid past small talk and fixed on the horizon line where danger tends to show first as a change of color. The Five Poppies operation, from what he could assemble, worked like a mirrored maze. Every hallway appeared to lead outward, but most delivered you deeper in. Clinical trials that did not want to be called trials, philanthropic donors who preferred aliases to plaques, and a staff whose credentials glowed a little too brightly to be believable. Jason had spent enough time triangulating threats to know when a map is lying. If Britt was tangled in that lie, it was because she thought she could bend the maze to serve patients who had been failed by the straight corridors of conventional medicine. It was a noble sin. It was also a dangerous one, because noble sins are the easiest for powerful men to exploit. If the resort's glossy facade was one part of his dilemma, Carly was the other, and the line between them ran through the name of a young woman who had grown up with fire in her voice and salt in her blood. Jocelyn had lived her life under a microscope she never asked for, learning earlier than most how to stop blinking when the flashbulbs popped. The town insisted on seeing her as a symbol of legacy, of resilience, of the way Corinthos gravity bends a family's orbit. Jason never bought the symbolism, he saw a person. He had his reasons for keeping quiet about what he suspected was now perched on the edge of Jocelyn's life like a bird deciding whether to land. A move, a clearance, an infiltration, a choice that might embroil her in networks where the line between protector and target eroded in the rain. The trouble with secrets in Port Charles is not the keeping, it is the way they multiply. Protecting Carly often meant giving her the full map, but this time the map itself could draw fire. Silence, for once, might be the only shield large enough to cover both mother and daughter. Silence never lasts here. It fractures under footsteps, under the squeak of marker against whiteboard in a PCPD conference room, under the sobering tick of a courtroom clock. While Jason sifted through the fault lines between duty and confession, another fault line opened across town. Nathan returned to Port Charles with a shadow where years should have been. 7 missing seasons had carved hollows behind his eyes, and the first thing the hollows drew in was the question everyone wanted answered. The second thing they drew in was doubt. Nathan was a man who wore decency as if it had seams and buttons, a garment chosen each morning. It was difficult to imagine him vanishing without leaving tidy notes and emergency contacts. But the story his body told as he walked, careful, as if remembering gravity, suggested a path less orderly. If he had been kept, he had also been used. If he had been hidden, he had also been remade. Dante felt the shift the minute Nathan stepped into the squad room. There are reunions that warm, and reunions that warn, this one did both. The questions on Dante's legal pad looked straightforward in ink and treacherous in air. Where had Nathan been? Under whose authority? What operations had borrowed his badge number while his badge was somewhere far from his chest? Silence can be tactical, amnesia can be manufactured. The 7-year gap was a locked file, pages scissored out, the staples still warm to the touch. Port Charles has learned to read what is not written. The missing years told a story of private prisons without bars, of handlers who refined the art of building loyalty from scarcity, and of missions that bled across borders and then back into living rooms. Nathan's return wasn't simply a miracle of survival, it was a subpoena for the truth. That subpoena reached deeper than the police station. It threaded itself through Jason's deliberations, through Britt's ledger of compromises, through Carly's instinct to count threats like a mother counting heads on a field trip. Nathan's lost seasons hinted at a network that could intersect with the very enterprise that had set up shop behind the 5 Poppies lobby fragrance. If an unseen syndicate could claim an officer for 7 years and return him only when the chessboard required a new pattern, then the resort's quiet empire might be one rook in a larger game nobody had consented to play. Britt, who had insisted on believing medicine could be a sanctuary from commerce, now had to consider that medicine had been recruited for war. Jason, who measured trust like a precious metal, had to reckon with the possibility that the safest thing for Carly was the one thing most likely to cost him her trust: omission. Around them, Port Charles did what it always does when too many truths ripen at once: it grew louder. The docks talked. The hospital gossiped. The coffeehouse tried to serve calm with its cappuccinos and failed. Every routine held a tremor. Jason traced his instincts the way a surgeon traces the old scar before beginning anew. He mapped contingency plans, built redundancies, taught himself to hear the subtle differences between a door closing and a trap springing. He ordered his priorities with the ruthlessness of a man who accepts that kindness without strategy is a prelude to casualties. Britt needed a clean extraction from whatever obligations the resort had written into fine print. Carly needed protection that didn't look like protection until after the storm. Jocelyn needed time to be a young woman with agency rather than a piece on any board. And Nathan needed a path from being a mystery to being a man again, which meant the truth would have to be coaxed out without tearing the stitching that held him together. The coaxing began in layers. Dante did not press so much as set the stage for recall. Dates arranged like stepping stones across a river, names offered gently, the promise that no answer would place blame on the wrong ledger. Nathan's memories arrived like weather, not like files. First a smell of diesel, then the sensation of tight canvas over skin, then the clack of a key that was never meant for him. He remembered a coastline he'd never vacationed on and a language he only knew in commands. He remembered medicine administered without names, and signatures erased after the ink dried. He remembered being told he was chosen because he was honest, as if honesty were a switch someone else could flip on and off. Each fragment added torque to the investigation and, inevitably, to Jason's moral equation. If the syndicate that owned those fragments also had its fingers underneath the polished desk of 5 poppies, then Britt's confession would not be an end but a beginning. Confession does not cure fear, it teaches it to speak. When Britt finally named what she knew, the room felt smaller. She spoke not in scandal but in systems. Shell nonprofits that wrote grants to one another, patient intake streams that fed into data wells, a research director with a resume that changed every year and still somehow added up. She had agreed to lead a program because the outcomes on paper looked like miracles, and because she was tired of telling families the clinic had nothing left to try. The moment she realized those outcomes were being curated, patients nudged into risk categories that justified radical therapy, consent ushered along too swiftly, she had started to document. She was, in that way, both the resort's liability and its salvation. Her records could dismantle the facade. They could also end careers and close labs that, despite their shadows, had given real hope to people running out of it. That was the catch, and Port Charles rarely offers a choice without one. Jason's decision, when it came, was not a thunderclap but a series of quiet alignments. He would treat Britt's safety as a mission and Carly's peace as a promise. He would shield Jocelyn from the blast radius by controlling the detonator, timing disclosures so that information could not be weaponized against her. He would accept that some bridges might burn behind him and that he would have to keep walking regardless. With Dante, he would build a corridor through which Nathan could carry what remained of those 7 years without collapsing under the hull. And in the background, he would pull at the sutures holding 5 poppies to the larger syndicate until the seam opened wide enough for sunlight. None of it guaranteed victory. All of it guaranteed motion, and motion was the one currency in town that still bought you a chance. By the time night wrapped itself around the river again, Port Charles had changed in ways the morning would not immediately recognize. The hospital felt less clean. The marina felt less free. House lights went out across neighborhoods where people had finished dinners they tried not to talk through and set alarms they knew could only accomplish so much. In one of those houses, Carly stood where she has always stood, at the point where love and strategy intersect and bruise. If she suspected there were truths hovering like moths just beyond her lamplight, she also understood that sometimes love asks you to trust the hand that is swatting the moths away. In another corner of town, Britt sat with her documentation and the blank space that comes after bravery. In another, Dante reviewed notes that did not yet have a place to land. And in a precinct's quiet room, Nathan stared at a wall where he was learning to pin his memories like photographs, not to prove he had survived, but to prove he had returned. The river kept moving. That is what the river does. But the men and women who guard Port Charles know that forward is not the same as safe. They know that some battles are won by refusing to let a story be told by the people who most benefit from the ending. Jason understood this deeply as he folded one promise around another and braced for the consequences of both. If the town required him to be an executioner of plans and a steward of hearts, he would take up both jobs with the steadiness that has always made him formidable. And as the first flicker of dawn sketched a new horizon across the water, the choices did not look simpler, only clearer. Save the doctor who tried to save too much, protect the mother whose strength could move a city and yet was vulnerable in the places that mattered most, defend the daughter on the cusp of decisions that would echo for years, and help the cop who lost 7 seasons find a way to live the next one on his own terms. In that alignment there was no triumph, only resolve, but in this town, resolve is the first medicine administered, the one that makes every other remedy possible.